Welcome to this video. So in this video, we will performing an exercise to collect data from an API. The example here is to collect data from the GitHub API. The GitHub API is a RESTful API which will provide data in a JSON format. The documentation of the API is provided to you. In this particular exercise, we are interested in two endpoints. One of them that will give us information about the repositories of a certain repository owner or a user. And the other one will give us specific information about the specific repositories. Let's take a look at this exercise. First, we want to calculate how many code repositories does the user Hanisaf own. This is the endpoint. The only thing we need to change is to plug the owner name instead of colon owner. Now notice if I click on this one, I'll probably will not get any information because the owner, period owner, does not exist. We are supposed to change this to the owner name. And this will give us the information about the repositories of this owner in JSON format. If you scroll through this result, you can see it's a list of objects. Now it looks like a dictionary. Again, it's not a Python dictionary. It's a list of JavaScript objects. What we need to do is simply to count these objects. So we have imported requests in JSON. What we need to do is to create the URL. So the URL will be exactly this URL here. It's sometimes a useful idea to plug in to create a formatted string so that instead of typing in a URL, we can break it to user and plug in user or owner if we want to go by the terminology of GitHub owner. And the URL itself will be now a formatted string. Instead of the name of the owner verbatim, it's basically the owner, the value in the owner variable. This allows us to create kind of a more meaningful code and presumably extend it in the future if we want to change the owner to someone else. The next step is to issue a GET request. So I'm going to create this request by calling the function GET from the request package, and I'm going to use the URL here. It will take a while, just a second, to issue this request and get back the results. It's always a good idea to check the status code so that we ensure that the request was fulfilled successfully, which is the case in here. Next, we need to get the text from the request and convert it to a JSON object. There are two ways to doing this. One of them is just to simply take request.text. That's basically the text verbatim, not the requests, request.text. That's the text. And then call in the function from the JSON package, the package that we imported here above, JSON dot load string request.text. It will basically convert it to a Python object that we can process in Python. That's one way to do it. The other way to do it is to call on the function JSON from the request object. This is a handy shortcut. Will give us basically the same results. Whether you go way one or way two, it doesn't make a difference. The main important point in here is that the type here is a list, and if we peek at this list, if we take a look at the first element, it's basically a dictionary. So now it's a list of dictionary in Python. To answer the question here, how many code repositories does this user have? Again, this list itself contains a dictionary per each one of the repositories, right? So way0, for instance, is one of the repositories that this user owns on GitHub, including all information about this repository. So what we need to do here to answer the question is to count the length of, either way1 or way2, the result, which will basically give you 21 as a result. The next question is asking us to report which repositories were created in 2019. Now, if you take a look at any repositories, for instance, if you do way10 here, you will see that this repository itself has a repository name associated with it. So that's the name of the repository here. 4t, for instance, u-css. And this URL is basically will give us information, detailed information about the repository. So if I go ahead and copy and paste this URL, which is basically the same as this endpoint, api.github.com/repos/owner name and repo name, that will basically give us information about this repository. Now this information here contains this is the full information, and we are interested in when this repository was created, which is here, created at this timestamp. So what we need to do with this data is to basically go ahead and issue a GET request for each one of these repositories. That's the name of the repository. And go collect the request results and grab the timestamp on that repository, and then filter those repositories that have a creation date equal to 2019. There are different ways to address this question. We basically need to collect the names of the repositories, and then we need to go for each repository and issue a request to get its full information, and then we need to process the request. What I'm going to do here, I'm going to do this using plain Python. Way1 or way2 are lists of dictionaries. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to get the name of in each one of the repositories. So I'm going to do repository name for repository in way1, and this will basically give me a list of the repo names in a list. That's a list comprehension. Each element in the list is a dictionary, so I'm getting the value associated with the key in that dictionary. Let's call these names. The next step is that I want to get the text, the full information about this repository. Now I'm going to use a list comprehension. Being optimistic, I think all of the requests will be fulfilled successfully. I can write a loop and interject with an if statement and error correction if I think that these requests may not be successfully delivered. So what I'm going to do here, I'm going to create a list called data. And this list data, for each one of these names, I need to do the following things. I need to do a request.getURL, and I need to take the JSON of that request object. Now I'm not sure what URL is, so let's put this one as is for now, but I'm going to go for each name in names. Now notice that names here is a list of the repo names, and the username has been put above, right? That's the username, the owner name. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to create a formatted string here, which is basically the API request, the API endpoint, this one. Now owner has been specified above, that's the owner. Repo here is name. So I can either use name, or if I wish to use the same terminology, I can do just repo in names. So that's the URL for each one of these repos. And this is calling a function get from the request package. This whole thing will give us a request object, and then I'm calling JSON on it. So fingers crossed, just hit enter and wait until all of these requests are sent and delivered back to me. I'm going to check that length data is 21, which means I got data for each one of them. Obviously data, each element is a dictionary, and this is the full information I need. Now I'm interested in the creation date, which is somewhere toward the end. Created at. So each one of these repos is a dictionary. If I get the created at, this will give me the creation date. Now you can see that this is a string, and it's a well-formatted string. So the year is basically the first 4 characters. So what I'm going to do with this string is to basically grab the first 4 characters and only select those repos that contain from which the first 4 characters are equal to 2019, the criteria I wish to use. Again, I'm going to do it in a list comprehension. So what I'm going to do here, I'm going to get each repo. It's up to me if I want to dump the whole repo information or perhaps just the name. For repo in data, that's the name. Those are all the repos. Here is my optional if statement. If repo created at starts with 2019. Those are basically the repos that were created in 2019. This concludes this video.